Hello, my science lovers. Today in This Week in BS, we are going to talk about conservation, biodiversity. We have Dr. Jason Odell with us. He has some amazing photography we're going to share with you and some awesome stories about biodiversity associated with that. We'll be taking our questions, having a lot of fun, pretty easygoing chat. Your approximate wait time is about a minute. I'm glad you guys are here. It's going to be fun. I'm going to play a video a little bit first, thanking my patrons, because I couldn't do what I do without them. And then we're going to have a little fun with Cam Girl of Science video, just poking fun at some haters. And then our intro. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, and we are live. Let me unmute our guest here, Dr. Jason Odell. It seems I might have some issues with the internet, so please bear with us if the images are choppy. So, thank you for being here, Dr. Odell.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for inviting me. I'm totally delighted to be here. It's great.
This is so awesome. So why don't we just get started? Why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, what you know, what you love? How about that?
I'm still trying to figure out who I am, right?
Yeah.
I am a photographer in Colorado Springs, Colorado, the land of infinite winter, it feels like. But I have a PhD in biology from the University of California, Riverside. Go Highlanders. And I studied physiological ecology and evolutionary biology, and I published several papers from my dissertation on evolution, physiological performance of Trinidadian guppies, and that ought to give you a hint as to where my Twitter handle came from, because we studied evolution in populations of guppies. And I've done a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but in 2010, I became a full-time professional photographer, and mostly what I do is I lead photo tours and workshops and photo safaris, teaching people how to get better pictures, but going to really great places around the world, doing landscape travel and as well as wildlife photography whenever I can. It's fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun. So, I figure what we could do is kind of dive into a little bit of talking about, I put all your pictures together for a slideshow, so I don't know how you want to go about that. So maybe we could start with talking about some of, essentially some biodiversity, and I don't know. Let's just kind of jump in there. So we're talking before about different issues, especially where climate change is like a big thing, and people are saying, well, is this a real thing or not? And what happens if we lose biodiversity? We're cutting down the rainforest. We have lots of wooded areas in the U.S. I believe at one point in time, this administration wanted to kind of sell up portions of Yellowstone and kind of eliminate a bit of the national park system. So this is all kind of problematic. So how about we talk about some of the things that we've seen in the past in regard to issues with biodiversity, either removal of habitat or introduction of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to sell to the average person these very, it's not nebulous, but the concept of challenges with a thing like biodiversity, for example, because it's such a broad thing. It just means anything to anybody, right? And what's the idea of what's the big deal about losing diversity? And the problem is that you just don't really know until it happens, right? I mean, these are I can't sit here and say, well, if this goes, then this is what's going to happen to you, because we don't know that experiment. What we do know is, like, if you look back to when CO2 levels in the planet, for example, were much higher. Well, guess what? There, where I'm living right now used to be under the bottom of an ocean. So just check out the, if you check out some of the maps of the Earth, going back in time, we haven't always been where we are. So there's a lot of things where I grew up in Florida will be potentially would be underwater when things are warmer. But it's an incremental thing. It's a tiny thing. It's not like one day you're going to wake up and all of a sudden you're flooded out or something like that, right? Well, the same thing with biodiversity, in my opinion. I mean, it's so critical. Species are always going to come and go. That happens. But what we're seeing right now is sort of a level of turnover that's kind of much higher than what we would normally expect. But there's so many interconnected species, whether you're talking about, plants and fungi, all the different kingdoms, animals, plants, and you never know which one is going to be that one piece, the load-bearing wall that when this one, if something happens, it crumbles. And, it's funny, my mother once upon a time had this little story about biodiversity, and she likened it to being, you're on an airplane and you're looking out the window of the airplane, and you're on the ground. There's a mechanic there, and he's pulling little rivets out one by one, pulling out rivets, and you're like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I mean, it saves weight, we save fuel. Nothing. It seems like no big deal, right? I mean, and that's true, but at what point does that one pop out, and now and now you're going down in flames? And so we gotta. Word choice matters, biodiversity matters, because, we were talking earlier about rainforests and, pharmacological components. Just, take aspirin, right? Aspirin's from willow bark, but other things that come out of these things. And, you clear out your rainforest, you might have just wiped out a species that could have had the cure for cancer if you had just known about it. And you never know how that's going to happen. And, that's the hard part. I mean, you're doing things, and sometimes we do things that we mean well. And some of these anecdotes from the 50s are, testament to that, where we tried to introduce some sort of biological control to get rid of a pest species, right? So you've got things overrun, so you bring in something, and well, that something is now completely in an environment where it's got no predators, and it creates all kinds of havoc. So
Yeah.
it's tough.
It is. I think probably the important thing to note about biodiversity, it can mean a lot of things to different people, but essentially the more biodiversity you have, the more of the weight is kind of spread out. You know what I mean? So you have lots of different species of things doing different jobs. And so the more things that you have that are different, doing different things, the more productive an ecosystem can be. That's my thought on that.
That sounds like a really great way of describing it. I mean, you look at disruption just in your local neighborhood. I mean, think about the birds you see in your neighborhood, around the office. Well, it's just crows and mockingbirds and these species that are adapted well to habitats that have been disturbed.
Right.
But then these other things that are really nice, you might not see them because they have been, excluded.
Yeah.
And you just don't know. We don't know everything about. We don't know everything about every species, right? So you don't necessarily know the importance of the role. I mean, take the honeybees, right? I mean, there's something that we are inadvertently being disruptive to honeybees amongst everything else. And if bees are gone, we lose, you kiss your fruit goodbye pretty much.
Yeah.
So many things rely on this. And so it's not just hey, it's nice to look out my window and see something other than a mockingbird or a crow. It's like the food on your table could be really impacted by this. And what's a real shame is that it's just really hard to get that notion across of the importance of these things, because it hasn't happened yet. And it's gonna require, I'm afraid, something catastrophic to happen for people to see, oh, okay, maybe this is really a problem.
Yeah, I think especially with the science communicator thing, getting people to care and understand, is particularly important, because they may not, it's like, well, why do I care about this particular species of this flower that's in the rainforest and this biodiversity hotspot? They do have what they call biodiversity hotspots, which a lot of groups are trying to just, okay, if you got to mow down this section, let's keep this one section here, because there's a huge amount of biodiversity in this one little section, and we want to study that. So please don't destroy this one section.
Right.
That's where we're at with conservation. It would seem, because people are, palm oil industry, that's a big thing. They're mowing down sections of rainforest to put a single species of palm oil trees. So it's just like they just cover it, and then they don't go back and replant. They just mow down more land to plant more. And so the single species thing, you're wiping out all of this habitat associated with all of these animals, all of these plants, just to put a solitary species there. That's a big problem.
and in some cases, a species that isn't native to that area in the first place. And there's all kinds of studies on monocultures. When you have a single crop, and, one thing can get in there and just wipe it out real easy, because you are changing the habitat.
Yes, you are. And so we were talking before when you mentioned pharmacological things. You can have various species of the same type of plant where one version is poisonous and then the other version has medicinal properties, because there's a slight little tweak in the genetic code to where that protein that's poisonous over here is actually a medicine here. Periwinkle was found in the rainforest, and it's still used in cancer therapies. So that's kind of one of those things we have to kind of keep in mind. It's not just let's save this one species of this thing. It's we're losing very rapidly the opportunity to study all of these different particular species that are within this section. And there's just not enough people to study everything. Science takes a long time.
Yeah, you don't have to remind me about that. Getting my degree, it seemed like that was the number one question. You never ask a PhD student when you're going to be finished. That's the worst thing you can do. Just saying. But no, you're
when are
right.
you
I
going
mean,
to be done? Oh my God.
yeah, when are you going to be done? That's always the first. Are you? Yeah, okay. It's not easy that way, but no, but the other thing is just the finite nature of, we not only have a finite number of finite resources in terms of, non-living things. There's a finite amount of resources that we have to deal with on the planet, but species are finite.
Yes.
Once something is gone, it's gone. And what you don't know is, who cares about this bug that you just got rid of? But if it was food for some other thing, or important as a pollinator for some plant, you may lose. You have this cascading ripple effect. You get rid of, and that's why it's not fair to say, well, it's just one little thing, it doesn't matter here. Well, everything is interconnected.
Right.
And when you disrupt that, the environment changes, and things change, but when they change rapidly like this, evolution doesn't work quite that quickly. It can be pretty fast, but ecosystems take a while to build, and so there's a level of disruption that can be tolerated by a system, but at some point you're just overwhelming it.
Okay, so you mentioned this like domino effect, and I'd spoken with you before about Operation Cat Drop. So I thought I have a little shortened version, and this comes to us from catdrop.com. So you can go to this website and dig down and learn about some of the ridiculous things humans have done to try to fix these issues. Now, here's the thing. It's really hard to undo a thing once you start it, okay? So, and this is quoting from the website. In the early 1950s, there was an outbreak of a serious disease called malaria amongst the Dayak people in Borneo. Now, the World Health Organization tried to solve the problem. First, they sprayed large amounts of a chemical called DDT, and that was to kill the mosquitoes that carried the malaria. All right? That's step one. Now, the mosquitoes died, so yay! And then there was less malaria, all right? So the mosquitoes, after they died, there was less malaria, and that was good, right? We was like, mission accomplished, yay, pat ourselves on the back. All right, now, however, there were side effects. One of the first effects was that the roofs of people's houses began to fall down on their heads. So what?
I hate when that happens.
Yeah, you hate it when your roof comes caving in, man. It turned out that the DDT was also killing a parasitic wasp that ate thatch-eating caterpillars. All right? So without the wasps to eat them, there were more and more thatch-eating caterpillars. Worse than that, the insects that died from being poisoned by DDT were eaten by gecko lizards, which were then eaten by cats. So the cats started to die, the rats flourished, and the people were threatened by outbreaks of 2 new serious diseases carried by the rats: sylvatic plague and typhus. Woohoo!
Yes. I think I read your mind on that one.
Yes! Not only do we have DDT, our houses are caving in, but we're also going to get typhus. This is wonderful, all because of the malaria thing. So, to cope with these problems, which it had itself created, the World Health Organization had to parachute live cats into Borneo. So they literally were parachuting cats onto in Borneo, just dropping them out. The freaking helicopters, I guess. I'm hoping there were some land folks to try to find them, because or they just let them be feral, But the point is, essentially, when you go from, we're trying to solve this one problem, so we get rid of the mosquitoes. Oh no, we've now killed this wasp that eats this thing, that eats our roofs, and now the cats, this thing was now getting eaten by geckos, and the cats ate the geckos, and those cats got sick, and now the rats are out of control, so let's drop more cats in. It's hard to fix a thing once you've started this domino effect, and I don't think people understand that. and people like they seriously threw cats out of helicopters with parachutes. Yes, they did. That happened. They dropped them out like that. They're like, well, crap, we better just add more cats. So.
and you know, all of these things we should point out, or you know, they start with the best of intentions.
Right.
Let's be clear. I mean, malaria is a debilitating disease.
Yes.
You know, and there's different flavors of malaria, and you don't want it. And in fact, eradicating malaria in a lot of places by eradicating mosquitoes is part of the reason why people are able to survive in places like, you know, the Panama Canal Zone. Mm-hmm. You know, I was just in Panama last month, and you know, I visited the canal, and they were, you know, this was built in the early 1900s, and you know, it's an amazing engineering feat. But most of the people who died working on the canal wasn't because they died actually, you know, because some piece of machinery fell on them or something like that. They died in malaria. That was what was really a problem. And it's just that when you have a, you know, so DDT is an incredibly effective insecticide. It's you know, the fact is that it has a lot of unintended side effects, but there's ways to apply it that, believe it or not, I mean, you talk about myth busting. It's like you can actually apply DDT to things like the walls of mud huts and things like that in a way that won't get into the environment and will not, you know, but it's when you indiscriminately spray it into the environment, it covers everything. You know, it's an indiscriminate insecticide. It kills everything.
Kills everything.
And it's like like the parasitic wasps and everything else. And you know, this is bad news. You know, humans, we really do have good intentions when it comes to things like biological control.
Yes.
You know, my favorite story is the cane toads in Australia.
Somebody's mentioning that in the side chat.
Yeah, there
Ronna
you go.
King.
And I need to find the link to the YouTube video of the cane toads. This black and white. It's I would say it's funny, except that, you know, it involves trucks and it involves cane toads crossing the road. But the general idea was that you introduce species that's non-native in an attempt to control a pest. In this case, it was a beetle grub that was eating sugar cane. And well, the cane toad, well, they didn't really study it. That somebody somewhere thought, hey, maybe these frogs, you know, these are toads. And these are the toads that are poisonous to your pets. If your dog eats one, they'll froth and they can die. And so they introduced them thinking they would eat the grubs. And what actually ended up happening was toads had no natural predators in Australia. Their population exploded just crazy to the point where streets were overrun, flowing with toads, and people were swerving, trying to miss them. And then the toads never even ate these beetle grubs in the first place. So you know, they didn't even do what they were intended to. You know, so the side effect was nothing but bad. And you know, that happens. I'm sure there's and I didn't look up. There's, you know, obviously going to be some success stories, and we want to do things. And I think what science wants to do, you know, if you look back on it and you say, how could we target this one thing? Right. Instead of just, you know, we'll hit it with some broad spectrum thing. You know, now what we see is, you know, the idea of you want to control pests, but you want to do it in a way that is not damaging to the environment. When I was in graduate school, I did some work in a lab where they studied parasitic wasps. Right. And the idea is that if you could figure out the genes of so these wasps would sting caterpillars, but they wouldn't kill them. They would just, and they lay their eggs outside them, and you know, eventually the caterpillar would die. It's pretty gross. It's like, you know, all these little parasitic wasps, but they had an effective paralyzing agent in their sting that wouldn't kill the wasp, wouldn't kill the caterpillar. And so the idea was like, hey, if we could treat, you know, plants with this, the caterpillars might eat that, and it would be toxic to them, but not toxic to something else. The BT bacteria, was it Bacillus thuringiensis? I forget its name, but you know, BT toxin is like that, where it's toxic to insects because they have a completely different metabolic pathway than any, you know, than vertebrates do. So it wouldn't be toxic to you or me, but it kills insects. So a lot of what we're trying to do, or a lot of what science is trying to do, is saying, how can we take this thing that we know that works in a natural situation and engineer it in a way, to deploy it on a larger scale so that we can get rid of pests, but not get rid of everything. It's like you only want to get rid of, if it's eating your corn, you want to get rid of it, but you don't want to spray the whole field and kill the bees because you just sprayed everything with a toxin. So
yeah,
I mean,
it's kind of how I feel about hand sanitizer. You don't need to kill everything on your skin. There is some beneficial bacteria there. And the bacteria that survive, that 1% that survives, because it kills 99% of all.
I was thinking exactly what you were thinking here, Mel.
They just proliferate and they just grow, and then we get superbugs that are antibiotic resistant, and then you're in trouble.
Artificial selection 101.
That's how that works. And so all these people that are just, unless you have a compromised immune system or work in an environment where you're exposed to all kinds of pathogens, there is absolutely no reason to have hand sanitizer. Just as an aside, that's how it can be a problem. You need biodiversity. You need biodiversity in bacteria.
That's right. And the whole study of gut flora is pretty impressive. They show that when you have a diverse bacterial population in your gut, you have fewer digestive problems and things.
Yeah.
And that's just right now. A lot of that is just I don't want to say voodoo, but it's like we don't understand.
It's on early days for that type of research.
Exactly, and it's amazing, and it's just coming along.
And the thing that's important to note about that, there is some of these bacteria, those particular harmful ones. There's some harmful bacteria that they're finding that's in your mouth and in your gut that might actually produce proteins that accelerate Alzheimer's and certain types of brain things. So that particular protein that you find in your mouth for like bad oral hygiene, they're finding the same protein in the brains of people who have Alzheimer's. And so this is still, that's still a new budding area of research, but it's growing with studies. More and more studies are coming out about how even your body biodiversity in bacteria is exceedingly important. So touching on that, another example I was going to bring up, and then we're going to take a look at some of your really awesome pictures. All right, so another example. So the brown tree snake in Guam, how the arrival of one invasive species damaged the ecology, commerce, electrical systems, and human health on Guam. This was a comprehensive information source, and this comes to us from USGS. And you can download this yourself. It's a report from 2002, I think. But essentially, what happened in 1952, the brown tree snake was accidentally transported from its native range in the South Pacific to Guam, probably as a stowaway in a ship cargo. So this little snake hopped a ride on this boat. Now, what happened after that? The abnormally abundant prey resources on Guam and the absence of natural predators and other population controls, the brown tree snake populations reached unprecedented numbers. All right, so snakes caused the extirpation of most of the native forest vertebrate species. Thousands of power outages affected private, commercial, and military activities. Widespread loss of domestic birds and pets, and considerable emotional trauma to residents and visitors alike when snakes invaded human habitats with the potential for severe envenomation of small children. So since Guam is a major transportation hub in the Pacific, numerous opportunities exist for the brown tree snakes on Guam to be introduced accidentally to other Pacific islands as passive stowaways in ship and air traffic from Guam. Numerous sightings of the species have been reported on other islands, and an incipient population is probably established on Saipan. It is important that people who may come in contact with the brown tree snake, particularly on neighboring islands and other high-risk sites, understand the scope of this problem and how to identify the snake so proper action can be taken. This resource has been developed to provide source materials on the history of the invasion, continuing threats, research results, and containment and management of the brown tree snake in Guam and its relevance to other islands and mild continental environments. So check that out. It's available to you on pubs.er.usgs.gov. That's the little abstract that's associated with their particular resources that are available to you. But yes, introduction of a single snake caused that much damage. So
why did it have to be snakes?
It's always snakes. Oh goodness. So it's pretty fun. I say it's funny, but it's not funny.
Not funny.
It's not funny. It's
not
more like
funny, ha ha funny.
Yeah. It's not ha ha. It's just what in the heck and heck. It's like this one snake did all of this damage. So how do you undo that? That's the thing. How can you go back and undo all of that? And so it's important for us to understand, by just introducing one thing or removing one thing, it can all fall apart.
Absolutely. And we don't have St. Patrick's to come and march the snakes off of Guam, so what are we going to do?
Yeah. So
lots of stories like this. That's the thing. And a lot of these things happened and we just aren't aware of them. So there's an awareness factor that you have to have.
Yeah, and so it's important to kind of learn from the past and we go uprooting a lot of these delicate little interconnected things. It can just erupt and then you have a big old mess to deal with. I mean, there's a lot of people who have to deal with a lot of wildlife that are in, whenever you like cut down a whole section of woods and put new housing there, those animals have to go somewhere. And so, in this nearby city where I live, they have like a really bad deer problem running around in the downtown city because it's, they have cut down so much of the wooded area for expansion that those animals are now running through the city. And so it's a massive deer issue. And then raccoons, I mean, they are garbage pandas, but they've kind of learned how to deal with humans. But they're kind of evolving and adapting the best that they can to the situation. But it's like, come on, man. So it's hard for me to get people, I don't understand why people don't take this into account. And this can also happen with plants. So if you start messing around with our plants, we're going to have a problem with our crops and our food. And then people are like, anti-GMO. I'm like, well, we're going to be 100% reliant on that if we lose the bees.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be 100% reliant on GMO crops if we lose bees. I mean, that's a reality. And people, they preach so heavy about GMO. I'm like, GMO is really not a big freaking issue. Now, I'm not talking about the business aspect of it and how Monsanto handles their business, but we absolutely have to have GMO foods in order to feed people. I mean, and I don't think...
My philosophy is very simple. Everything that you put on your table is genetically modified. The question is, what is the process that... So all you have to do is go back and look at the ancestral form of corn made. It's this tiny little thing.
Right.
That, thousands of years was selectively bred to be what we have and what we call corn now.
Right.
It's just now in the 21st century, we can do that on a much faster scale, whereas before it would take generations of breeding, selective breeding in crops or, and also domestic animals to get this modification so that what you're looking at in that species is nothing like what it started out as.
Right.
So, obviously you have to go through the issues of ethical questions and, what is it in there, but, genetic modification is been going on since the earliest human times. As soon as humans settled down and started domesticating things, that is a form of GMO. It, by the way I define it. Okay,
Yes.
so I know that it's a touchy thing.
Well, I mean, it's artificial selection. It's just they do it a bit faster in a lab. I mean, and the thing is the plants. There are FDA regulations on GMO. I mean, they can't just go and make corn and suddenly corn is no longer looking like corn, and then it has completely different chemical properties. It's no longer corn, and they can't sell it as that. So, I mean, there are regulations in place. You cannot alter an organism so much to the point that it no longer looks like the organism, or the chemical properties are different. I mean, so do dive in and read, folks.
Right.
There is stuff in place to make certain the corn you're eating is still corn. It's a little tweaked differently. It's not a big deal. All right. So let's take a look at some of your pictures. So you do lots of photography and you teach people how to shoot things in the ethical way, you know?
Right, this way. I don't shoot this way.
so whatever it is, I'm going to pull this up. So let me pull this up and I'll see if I can share my screen with you. So let's see. I'm trying to see if I can share my screen with you. So that's not it. Well, everybody's enjoying the lovely, lovely pictures that are going on right there. So,
well, if you tell me what the photo is, I have them on my computer.
Okay.
And I can sort of walk through. I don't know which order they're in, but I have them on my
okay.
side.
Let me see if I can share. All right. So, okay. So here.
Oh, wait. I think it might be starting on my side too.
Okay, are you...
Oh, look at that. Oh, here we go. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we're just going through an initial bunch of pictures. So if you see one that you think a particular story, let me know, and we can tell a bit about your story for any particular one. So this is some of the examples of the work that Dr. Odell does. How to properly shoot animals.
Right. So this is a pronghorn antelope out in South Dakota.
Okay.
And now we're looking at a flock of sandhill cranes, and they're interesting. The sandhill cranes migrate between New Mexico and Nebraska.
Okay.
This is a great bird. This is a bronzed cowbird. This is a caracara, and there's my buddy, the three-toed sloth.
Oh.
So this was down in Panama. I was just recently down there. I was down there in May scouting out a location for that. This is a golden collared mannequin, and mannequins are great birds. The males do these special dances, snap their wings to attract females. Here's some red lord parrots, also in Panama. So Panama is this hotspot of biodiversity that most people don't think about. It's right next door to Costa Rica. There's a strawberry poison dart frog, and they have some of them have spots that look like strawberries. This one didn't have as many spots. Here's a white-necked Jacobin hummingbird in the rainforest of Trinidad, and Trinidad is actually where I did some of my field work for my PhD. I threw this one in here because this is one of the glaciers up in Glacier Bay in Alaska, just to talk about how those are receding. We got ourselves, this is one of the species of boobies in the Galapagos, and they nest right on the ground, and you can practically walk up to them. This is a lizard in the Galapagos, called a lava, little guy, couple, maybe 4 or 5 inches long, little guy. And this is one of my favorites. This is a medium ground finch. This is one of Darwin's finches. So when you hear about the finches that Darwin studied.
About the beaks.
Yep, about the beaks. This is a baby sea lion in the Galapagos, so they're out there. So much diversity in this little place, 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. There's the marine iguana that people have probably heard about. They're amazing, both in terms of just how they've adapted to their environment is incredible. I want to talk about this guy here. This is a kiskadee. It's a flycatcher, and the reason I just bring it up is because it is a cool picture. It caught an insect and flipped it up in the air and made that happen. But this was down in Texas, in South Texas, and I would take people to photograph on in photo blinds. So you're like, it's like being in a deer hide, only it's set up for photography. And this really ties in well with what we were talking about with biodiversity. Now, in South Texas, and we're talking like the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, so really close to Mexico. You're very, within 10 miles of the border. But there are tons of ranches down there, ranch land, cattle ranches. And as you can imagine, cattle ranching is a pretty gnarly impact on the environment. But a lot of these ranches have been handed down for generations, and the people who currently own them just don't have anything to do with them. They're just like, well, I got this ranch, and I'm not wanting to raise cattle. I don't want to do that. What should I do? And so there was a group that created, there's a group called, let's see what they were called, the Images for Conservation Fund. And they're at imagesforconservation.org. And what they decided was there are some really amazing bird species that come across, and they're only present in the U.S. right down in the very south of parts of Texas and in New Mexico, like green jays, for example, like those bronze cowbirds. So this is the northernmost part of their range. And photography, especially nature photography, is a pretty popular thing. People want to get good photos of birds. That's why I teach people this. And the hardest thing about bird photography of any kind is going to see something different and getting close. So this group decided, hey, we can encourage people to restore the natural plant vegetation and the natural habitat on these ranches and set it up for photographers. Because in this particular case, if you are owning the ranch and you can say to photographers, you're going to see this species, maybe it's painted buntings, maybe it's green jays, maybe it's shakalaka, whatever it is, these species, photographers, people who are enthusiasts about this, they're going to pay good money to come down there and sit on your property in a blind and get those photos. So, but it only works. The incentive is to have the native habitat restored, because if you don't get that native habitat restoration going on, those species won't come in there and they won't be on your property. So this is win-win. It's a side income for the ranchers, and it's incentive for them to restore that native vegetation so they can get some use out of their ranch and maintain it and restore that ranch back to its native habitat, because they're not putting cattle on it anymore.
So there's a couple comments in the side chat. Andy had a question about one of the birds. Was that a lesser goldfinch?
Probably not, because most of these photos came from somewhere where they did not have goldfinches.
I think it was the mannequin that you were talking about.
It was probably the golden collared mannequin.
The golden collared
If you like the animal behavior, they're amazing. They display for the female on a little cleared out patch of the rainforest, and it's called a lek, L-E-K. Deer do this too. And the only purpose of this little territory is to attract females. And they can snap their wings, and they will come back, and they will perch, and they'll do their little dance. And if they do it right, they will attract the attention of the female mannequins. And, obviously, that's good for them. There are certain species of mannequins that require a partner. So one mature male will recruit a juvenile male to help him and teaches that other male the dance. Now, that second male doesn't get to mate with the female, but he's absolutely essential for the success of the primary male.
So he's literally a wingman.
He's literally a wingman, that's right. But the benefit to the juvenile, the immature male, is that he's learning to dance himself. He's going to learn that dance. He's going to know how to do it. So when he is mature enough, he can then go and get his own lek and do this. It's crazy stuff. It's amazing.
We're gonna have a talk, son. Now, if you want to get a lady,
that's right. You got to dance this way.
You got to dance. This is the way that they like to dance. Don't do it this other way. You see that guy over there? He's not gonna get a lady. He's not snapping his feathers right. You see, it's kind of sideways. Don't do that. The ladies
it
don't
was just
like
amazing to see this, and because this this little patch of ground, they clear all the leaves off it on the forest floor, and they get the little perches, and so if you just sit there, they eventually come back. I waited to get that photo. I was in sweltering humidity, just sweaty as heck. But I waited for about 30, 40 minutes, but eventually they came back, they got closer, and I was able to get those photos. So it's a lot of patience, but it works. It's really cool.
Oh, goodness. Sweaty, the things you do for your art.
Right, totally.
So if you have any questions, just toss them in the side chat, and I'll get them, and I'll ask Dr. J the questions. Dr. J almost sounds like a DJ name. Dr. J and the mannequins, Dr. J and the mannequins. It's almost like Robert Palmer video, except with birds.
That's right.
Oh my goodness. Let's see. So C4 said, I raised a blue jay once. It was learning how to fly, and my sister threw it up in the air so it could flap its wings. The only problem was she threw JJ into the ceiling fan. I am sorry. That's a terrible, terrible way. Ronna King says, bowerbirds do the same here. The young practice. So little bowerbirds.
Bowerbirds are a wonderful example of sexual selection in animal behavior. They have to create this they have their territory, but they actually build this thing out of sticks called a bower. It's amazing. And they decorate them, and blue is like one of their favorite colors.
Are they the ones that get like the little iridescent shells of insects and make it shiny? And
Absolutely. And if they find, and so the interesting thing is if they find little bits of like Coke bottles or blue plastic, buttons or something, boy, that's a winner. That's a hit with the ladies. They put those little things in there because those things are rare. They're hard to find. And, it really turns on the gal bowerbirds, it's amazing. And they have to do their little dance. It's great. Birds of Paradise are similar to that.
Yeah.
Very cool stuff.
Oh, goodness. So we have a question for you. Any plans on a Southern Hemisphere trip? It's from Ronna King.
The only Southern Hemisphere that I did so far was my trip to Galapagos, which was started in Ecuador. So I guess that was the Southern Hemisphere. I would love to be able to go out to do those things. It's just a matter of finding the client to join me. I do have a trip to go back to Panama next year. And I will say, if you want to see sloths, this place was chock full of them. The photo of the sloth that you put up there when it was coming down the tree, that was outside one of the cabins in the Eco Lodge.
Oh, wow.
And interestingly enough, talking about biodiversity, Costa Rica is known for having sloths. Well, Panama is right next door they're adjacent to each other. And this particular place is on the Caribbean side of Panama. And the sloths on that, it's on an island. They have three-toed sloths and two-toed sloths. I only saw the three-toed ones, but they're both there. But they don't have the large predators, the hawks, the eagles that are around in Costa Rica. They don't have the same predators. And so when we're out there, these sloths are actually pretty active during the day. I mean, we saw one with a baby clinging to it. Couldn't have been more than a month old. And had a little baby sloth. So if you like sloths, I am going down to Panama for a week to photograph rainforest, and most of it will all be on site. That's where those frogs are. There's insects, longhorn beetles. There's mushrooms. There's all kinds of, and then of course birds, parrots, lots of different birds, tropical things. Pretty amazing, actually, what you can see down there in terms of biodiversity. But I don't think a lot of people think about it. You think about Panama, you think about the canal.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people associate with that, yeah.
Exactly. And we'll see that, too. But
So Ronna says, yes, come to Australia. What are your thoughts on Australia? Yeah. Do you do any scuba diving, underwater photography? Have you branched out into that yet?
I have done a little bit of fun when I go snorkeling. So in Galapagos, I did snorkeling. In fact, there is an opportunity to go snorkeling. There's a reef right up. They have a dock on this island where the Eco Lodge is in Panama. And what I do is I use like a little GoPro on the stick.
Okay.
Underwater photography is really hard, and it's just, and the housing you have to put in your camera probably costs more than your camera.
Wow.
So it's like some of these because it's got to seal it up really well. And so it's a really tricky thing to do. But I just use a GoPro and capture video, and then I can pull stills. There's a video on my YouTube page of me following around a penguin in Galapagos. The little Galapagos penguins, they're about this big, and it was cute as hell.
I'll put a link.
They don't care.
I'll put a link to your photography webpage as well as your YouTube channel, so people can go and subscribe and take a look at your awesome work. So have you heard of the Underwater Explorer Society in Freeport, Grand Bahama Island?
I want to say that I've kind of heard of it, but I don't think I've heard of it. It sounds really cool.
It's been ages, feels like a lifetime ago that I went, but they actually have underwater cameras that you can rent. Nice. Already set up, and they have shipwreck excursions, snorkeling. They even have a dolphin habitat, which is actually kind of cool, but they don't keep dolphins there. It's open water, and so these dolphins come, and they do tag them for research purposes, and they do train them, but the dolphins they're free to go, they can come back as they want, and sometimes they bring friends. So you can actually spend a day with the dolphin researchers and kind of connect with them. They have scuba and all the equipment that you can just rent on site, which I thought was pretty amazing. So if you're not wanting to buy the camera, but you find yourself in the Bahamas, check out Freeport, the Underwater Explorer Society, and see what they have to offer, which is pretty awesome. Andy says, why am I thinking about Earthship all of the sudden?
As long as it's not Waterworld, we're okay.
Oh, yeah, it should be all right. So I'm trying to catch back. Somebody mentioned a Kiskadee. So I don't know much about a Kiskadee.
They're just a big flycatcher, a tropical species.
Big flycatchers.
They are a big flycatcher. And
I hear your bird, baby.
Yeah, Archie is trying to participate.
Aw.
He's good.
Let's see.
He just wants to say hi.
Yeah. Hi, Archie. I know you can't hear me right now. All right. So if you have any other questions for Dr. J, we'll probably wrap this up in about 7 minutes or so. So hit me up in the side chat. If you have any questions afterwards and we're not live, that's okay. Leave questions in the comments. You can find him at Evolved Guppy. Is one of his Twitters. Do you want to talk about your other Twitter?
Yeah, my photography Twitter is just Jason_Odell, and that's where I just post random things about photography and pictures. And so if you want to follow, just want to have the photography. My other Twitter is just kind of where I interact with folks most of the time in a casual way. And then my website is luminescentphoto.com, and from there you can kind of get to everything. And I have a Facebook page and an Instagram, and all these things that are there. And that's where I post the real photos. These are things that where I post things that aren't just selfies or iPhone snaps. And so I really have a passion for photography. There's a difference between a snapshot and a photograph, right? And I think we've decided that. Everybody has a phone, everybody has a camera now, but there are still things that you cannot do with an. As much as I like my phone camera, there's a lot of things that I still need a tripod and a real, big boy camera for, and that's what I try to impart on my tours and my workshops. Get people get creative and teach them how to make their photos better.
So what's your next workshop? What's your next workshop available? And I will post links to all of his social media in the description.
Oh, sure.
So.
Well, I have a last-minute opening to go to photograph the wildflowers up in Crested Butte, Colorado, where we're going to have a banner year, I think, for wildflowers, because Colorado is 100% drought-free for the first time in 20 years. There's not a spot of even abnormally dry. We are drought-free. I was just driving across the state, and the Colorado River is running really high and fast. I mean, it's great. So the snowpack, the wildflowers up there should be just epic. And then I go back to you saw the photo of the pronghorn, the antelope,
Yes.
in the montage there, and that's in South Dakota. And I go out to the Badlands every year, and it's amazing. And I teach landscape photography. And then my other trips are all full for the rest of the year.
Wow, that's
but,
awesome.
I do have some spots open, and if I can get enough people to go to Alaska in November and photograph bald eagles. I've got a trip to look for bald eagles in an eagle preserve up in Haines, Alaska. We've got a private tour guide for that. But then I have my trips for next year, and some of them are wildlife oriented, like Panama. Some of them are tour. We're going to go to Ireland. We're going to go to Croatia. We're going to have a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
And take pictures and just enjoy. And it's just being with people who share that same passion for creative photography, and you're in an environment where you're not the only person with the camera. Where they're going, hey Bob, get back on the bus. It's time to go. You've had your 2 minutes,
Yeah.
No, we're gonna get out of the bus, and we're gonna be able to take pictures of stuff for a good, 45 minutes to an hour, depending on where we go.
Right.
Because that's what it's about. It's about engaging with your subjects.
So Andy has a question. Canon, Nikon, Sony, which one is the best camera, do you think? What have you got?
I got this one right here. This is my new Nikon Z7 mirrorless SLR camera. They're all very good. And so what I would say is you can find reasons to like any of them. I've been a Nikon shooter since 1987, so I stuck with it. I have it. They're fabulous cameras. They all operate differently. They all have slightly. They're all cameras. The image quality on all of them is excellent. I prefer the Nikon ergonomics, but I'm biased because I'm used to it.
Yeah.
That's how I've gone through the process. So I think the general advice I give is, if you've got a relatively recent camera, most of your money gets sunk into lenses.
Yeah.
So unless you're willing to scrap, if you don't have any camera, or you only have a cheap lens, you can migrate to a different system, no problem. The cost of switching systems tends to be kind of high. Sell off all your gear from one. But Nikon's just come out with this new Z series of mirrorless cameras. They have a new lens mount. They have outstanding image quality. And it's fairly compact. This is a great little camera, and it's 45 megapixels. It's pretty amazing.
Awesome.
So it's a good time to be a photographer right now, because we have so much quality available to us that we didn't have before.
Andy says he might be able to join you for the Alaska photography.
Well, it's out there on my website. So I would love to have you on board.
I think he's in Colorado too, so he's a fellow native. He said it's damp here.
Finally we got a summer day. It's 81 degrees here in Colorado Springs today after we had 8 inches of snow a couple of weeks ago. So I'm ready for summer.
Oh goodness. All right, so we're coming up on almost an hour. Any other questions you guys have, just hit us up in the chat. So your final thoughts on biodiversity, conservation, whatever is bugging you,
Yeah. Well, I would say every little bit helps. And so it's easy for us to sit here and talk about things, but just every little bit is going to help. And it's about thinking about your impact on the environment. It's a bit, it's more than, it's always a bigger picture than what any one viewpoint might have. It's not just recycling and, but it's really about changing that attitude, and embracing that, and then hopefully, applying some, economic incentives for because at the end of the day, I'm not the one clearing out rainforests, right? There's products and things that come from there that we have to say, no, we don't want to buy these things, or we want to find different
sustainable. We need sustainable palm oil and that sort of thing.
Right, and so hey, I just read today, or just the other day, that alternative energy output is now in the U.S. now exceeds what coal or what coal can do. You know, so
Yeah.
people want it, and once there's the inertia, once the ball gets going, the momentum, then things start to change. And so every little bit helps.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been an absolute delight. It was so much fun to have you here.
Thank you.
And like I said, I'll update the description and put the links to all of his social media and his website to where you can go and go on a trip with Dr. J. And he will teach you how to photograph animals and possibly give you a fun story associated with how want to watch out for this particular guy. Don't get too close.
Don't step on the spiky plant. Yeah, that's right.
That spiky plant will inject all kinds of interesting poison into your skin, and you'll itch for 3 weeks. Oh boy. Well, thank you again for being on the show, Dr. J.
Thanks, Melody. I really appreciate it.
All right, and thank you guys in the chat for being here. This was a lot of fun, and so hit him up on Twitter. And if you have questions, you can find him on Twitter. You can hit me up on there. Okay, one more question. ScientistMel question: what sort of jobs are within the field within the study of field of biodiversity? So, any ideas for that for our last question?
Wow. I mean,
photography is one.
Well, conservation biology is one.
Conservation.
And that spans a lot of different, fields. So you've got, there's things in agriculture, there's plant botany, any of the
evolutionary biology. Also, you can
Absolutely.
actually monitor the connection between two particular species and how they interact with one another and adjust their own selection. I mean, I worked in a lab where they were looking at how the evolution of a plant and the evolution of a beetle were consistently influenced with one another because the beetle ate the plant and the plant would adapt in different ways. So that's one way you can do that as well. So
ecology. It's all evolutionary ecology is where it's at. And then from
amazing.
there you can kind of go on any direction you want.
Absolutely. All right, so I guess we're going to sign off for tonight. Thank you again. Please check out Dr. J. Odell. His photography is amazing. I'll put links in the description. And you too can go on a trip with him and meet him in person and everything.
I promise to shower.
You promise? Well, you might be a bit stinky if you're in the rainforest for a while. At the end of the day,
it's like taking showers.
It's kind of like that. Maybe you'll come back smelling all kinds of interesting plants and scents. All right.
They got cold beer at the Eco Lodge. I'm good.
Cold beer and photography with Dr. J. That sounds like a TV show right there. All right. Well, you guys have a great night. We're going to sign off. I'm going to play my patron video, and then we'll be signing off for the night. Thanks again.